Vincent van Gogh was born March 30th, 1853 in the Netherlands. He decided as an adult to dedicate himself to making art and spent the next 10 years drawing and painting. He focused the latter part of that career on painting landscapes. He is known for his vivid colors and energetic brushstrokes. His painting Starry Night is one of the most famous artworks today. Join me now as we paint a Van Gogh-inspired winter version of Starry Night. So for today's Vincent Van Gogh-inspired winter landscape, we're going to need a few things. Some watercolor or a little bit thicker paper if you have it. Also a long piece of black or a dark blue paper. If you don't have that, you could do this step by painting or coloring a piece of paper and then cutting it out. You'll need some crayons or oil pastels. Either will work. Oil pastels probably work a little better. Some watercolor paints and water and a large brush if you have one. And then some scissors and glue. So to begin our watercolor, we are going to first create some resist for those swirls for the stars and moon in the skies. And for this you can use either oil pastel or crayon. Now both of these are going to be a little bit difficult to see what I'm doing on the camera. But so you would start with a white crayon or oil pastel. I'm going to use some yellow because it will show up a little bit better on the camera. But what you want to do is decide where to put a moon, if you're putting a moon, and you're going to draw a big circle, maybe a little bigger than your thumb, and just kind of sloppily color it in. And then you're going to start making lines that swirl around that moon, and you can make some smaller stars with swirling lines around those as well. So I'm going to continue making some swirly skies with yellow or white crayon, just like so. And like I said, you might want to use white. I'm using yellow to show up better on the camera, but I'm going to go ahead and put some white in here as well. You can't see when I'm doing it, but when I do my watercolors, it will show up like magic in just a moment. So lots of swirling skies, some stars, no straight lines anywhere in this section of my art. Putting a few extra little white tiny circles that could be stars or they could be snow. So if you're using a crayon, you want to press pretty hard. You want a lot of that wax from the crayon to stay on your paper. And if you're using oil pastel, you need to press kind of hard. Maybe not quite so much. Okay, so I've put lots of white and yellow stars and swirls and tiny little snowflakes. So now I'm going to do the watercolor part of this watercolor resist. I'm going to start with plain water and brush it all over the top portion of my paper. And this is where having some thicker watercolor paper comes in really handy. If you're just using like printer or copier paper, you'll notice it might start to bubble, and you'll have to be very gentle so that you don't tear the thinner paper, but it will work too. All right, so now I've got a little bit of moisture on my paper. I'm going to get some dark blue for my sky and I'm mixing that color in the lid of my watercolor pans. If that gets too dirty, you can take a damp paper towel or an old rag and clean it out. So I'm getting lots of blue, and then just a little black to make a dark color. And I'm going to spread that all over the top 2/3 of my paper. I think I might just take turns going straight into the blue and the black paints. It gives me a little darker effect. And it creates some variety in my sky, so it's not all the same color. Now you can see as I'm brushing this color how those white and yellow marks I made with my crayon or my oil pastel, they push the paint, they resist the watercolor paint and push it right off of the paper wherever I covered the paper. The wax in oil in the crayon and the oil pastel do that work for me. So if it's not dark enough, I can keep going back with a little bit more watercolor paint and make it a little bit more vibrant and colorful. And getting that paper wet to begin with helps create a nice flowing background that doesn't show my brush strokes too much. And I usually like that effect with watercolors for the background. Okay, so I'm going to cover all but the bottom part of my paper with some dark blue kind of tones, different shades of blue. And all those wonderful marks I made with my crayon or oil pastel are still showing through. The watercolor paint will not cover them. Now if you were using tempera paint, this may not work as well. So that's why having some watercolor paint works great. If you only have tempera paints, use a lot more water with them and you might still be able to get this effect. So now I'm going to let this dry, move it off to the side while I do my next step of creating the foreground. Now you could create a village like in Van Gogh's Starry Night, but I thought for kind of a fun winter twist, I wanted to create snowmen and maybe a few village houses and mountains. So I'm going to draw on my black or dark blue paper with a white crayon so I can see it when it's time to cut. Whatever I draw and then cut out, I'm going to put the glue on this side, oops, and flip it over. So if I draw my snowman over on the right side, after I cut it out, he's going to end up on the left side of my paper, and you'll see what I mean in a few minutes. So instead of the big cypress on the left-hand side of Van Gogh's painting, I'm going to make a snowman. So I'm drawing the outline of a snowman. You could use pencil. It's a little harder to see when you go to cut, but white crayon shows up the best. So I'm just creating this outline and then kind of a mountain to go along, curving along. And then I think I'm going to put a few houses over here in the mountain, kind of like the houses in Van Gogh's Starry Night. And I'll make one of them look more like a church or schoolhouse. And what else do I need? Maybe one more house over here and maybe some bushes over on this side. So next I'm going to cut all around this outline. So you'll see I'm not cutting apart the different pieces of the snowman. If that happens by accident, that's okay. You can glue them back together. But I'm cutting around the outlines of the shapes. So you can see that I left the houses and the snowman all attached to one long strip of paper that I'm going to glue on the bottom. And don't worry about these extra lines, because when I put glue on here, I'm going to flip it over and you won't see any of those lines. So here's how I'll do my glue. You could use a glue stick for this. I prefer to use white school glue because I feel like it sticks a little better, especially if my painting is still damp. So I put it all along the edges, just a thin little bit, or you can just use little dots of glue. And then to make sure it's nice and smooth, I like to take an old paintbrush and smooth that glue out. You may want to work on a piece of newspaper so that your table or desk or wherever you're working doesn't get glue on it. Okay, and then I'm going to make sure to rinse that glue off that brush right away. Okay, now I'm going to bring back my watercolor sky, and I did not come down as far as maybe I should have, so I'm going to put this so that you can't see any of that white above it, and I can trim this little bit at the bottom off. So we should have come down a little farther with our sky, I suppose, in our step of painting. Now we've got this silhouette of a snowman and a little village at night, and to make this really come alive even more, you can take some oil pastels or crayons, some light colors like white or yellow, and you could put lights peeping out the window of these buildings in the village. And you could even go with a black. This would have been difficult to cut out, this detail, but you could draw the arms on your snowman like that. If you didn't put a hat on when you cut him out, you could put a hat now. If there's any other details that you'd like to add with some white, you could add little bits of details like so. You could add some snow on the roofs of the houses, or on this bush. You could just add some detail and texture to the hills, kind of like the swirls in the sky. Now, like I said, I don't like how this white shows up at the bottom, so I'll go ahead with a trimmer or scissors and trim that off. Or I could sign my work down there and put the date if I wanted to. So artists often sign their work in the right or left-hand corner, and they might put a date as well. So January of 2021, there's my date and my initials. And then sometimes you might even document your work by putting a description on the back. So this is a landscape, a winter landscape. After, that means inspired by Van Gogh, Starry Night. Okay, So I hope you enjoyed this winter landscape inspired by Van Gogh's Starry Night, and we'll see you next time here at Afternoon Art at BRAHM.